There's a video essay titled Why It's Rude to Suck at World of Warcraft, wherein the authors, one of whom leads a paid-to-be-there mythic prog guild, posits that World of Warcraft, and more specifically raiding, is a modern example of humans expressing their primitive need to collaborate and overcome a common goal. I'm adding a bit of my own commentary here, but it's not unlike being in a band, a stage production, or even being one of those Amish dudes that work together to build an entire house in like an afternoon. Seriously, just look at them go. Anyway, I do recommend watching that video in its entirety, and I'll link it in the description, but it inspired me to make this video. Hey gang, your pal Singe here. This guide / collection of tips is mainly for my guildies in Dark Legend over on Whisperwind, but if you're here, maybe stick around. There's a lot of videos on YouTube covering what I'm going to talk about, but maybe not in such plain English as I'm going to try to do here. I wanted to make a brief training primer thing that'll cover what a parse is, how to find your parsing information, and by extension, what the skill floor is for pushing endgame content. That said, I promise no matter what your current skill level is, you can play WoW at a competitive, competent level. Okay, so you've probably heard people talk about a parse, or having a great parse, or someone is padding their parse. To put it simply, a parse is a snapshot of your performance against a boss or entire dungeon. It's an incredibly unbiased and objective way to measure whether you're playing your class optimally or even correctly, and it takes your combat data and runs it against literally every other player that's logged their own combat data against the same encounter or dungeon. Parses become more accurate as seasons progress due to more people adding to that pool of information. And that makes sense, right? Aggregating more data reveals more concrete trends. At the tippy top level, the data gets a little muddy as professional players basically take turns ensuring that each of them gets an impossibly good parse by manipulating the fight to give a single star player unrealistic amounts of uptime against the boss. But for the most part, that's not really a thing we need to concern ourselves with. You can find all our guild's logs on Warcraft Logs. Most of our experienced players run logs that capture your hero's combat data without you doing anything. However, you're probably watching this video because you're trying to learn how to create and track your own combat logs. So let's talk through that process. The first step is to create a Warcraft Logs account and then integrate your Battle.net data onto the platform. This will pull all your characters under one umbrella. I'm not going to walk you through how to do that. It's as straightforward as it can be. You literally just go to the site and link Battle.net. It's all very official, all above board, very straightforward process. But then in game, you'll need to enable combat logs by going to the options and clicking advanced combat logging. Then type or create a macro /combat log. This creates a text file where the game spits out all your data. Now we need to set up Archon, which takes your log data and neatly packages it up for Warcraft Logs. On the desktop app, we need to point Archon at the folder containing our combat logs. We'll set our logs up so that only we can see them, but we'll make them public. Again, most people regularly post our logs to the guild, which you're more than welcome to do once you've got the hang of it, but for now we'll just stick to personal so that only we can see them. We can see in Archon that our logs are successfully sending to Warcraft Logs. Okay, last topic, and this is kind of the bait and switch of this video. It's what I really wanted to actually talk about. We need to talk about the way that Blizz inadvertently or intentionally, we may never truly know, added a skill floor to WoW with the addition of the single button rotation. The single button rotation has gotten this weird reputation as being kind of a scarlet letter, and that using it instantly brands you as some kind of casual. Here's the honest truth. If you know for objective fact that you don't need the single button rotation, you probably don't. You're also probably not watching this video either. But on the other hand, if you think that you don't need it, you're almost certainly wrong. For roughly half the specs in the game, an optimal single button rotation could net you a blue parse more often than you'd think. A blue parse just means that you're performing better than the majority of players that logged for that encounter. So let's take a look at the single button tier list. You should, with some exceptions, treat this screen as the easiest to hardest curve for classes to learn endgame content on. Some classes that you'd think would be really easy, like Ret Paladin, for example, have scuffed single button rotations for one reason or another. If you're not playing a spec in the S or A brackets, I'd heavily recommend you start there. Now, this guy has made a career out of showing you how to set up and play nearly every spec in the game as single button DPS. Once we're done here, you should head over to Dvalin's channel and watch the guide specific to your spec. He's going to run you through how to configure your bars, time your cooldowns, and so on. That said, this is the skill floor I alluded to at the start. There's absolutely zero shame in starting here on learning how to become a role or class specialist in WoW. But if this is square one for your journey, there's literally no shame in that at all. With time and experience, you might and probably will find yourself saying, I can press these buttons faster than this. And maybe that's true, but you might be surprised how close this gets you to hitting your parsing goals. So let's put this all to the test. For this video, I'm going to show off my Beastmaster Hunter against LFR Rotmire. Sporefall is such an ideal raid to run test parses in because frankly, he's as close to a real patchwork style fight that we've had in a really long time. And just as an aside, you might hear people say that sometimes. A patchwork style fight is just a boss from way back in Next Ramus where an abomination named Patchwork basically just stood there like a target dummy that bites the raid. It lets you get an almost unrealistically clean parse since in LFR the additional mechanics that require you to switch and interrupt targets don't even spawn. If you're watching this video after Sporefall, you should try running any LFR level content back to back to perform similar tests for yourself. First, I'll run one at 280 eye level where I do nothing but hold one button. I suspect it'll work pretty well, but Beastmaster does have an Apex talent that makes spamming kill command less optimal, and I know that single button will do that anyway. I'll also turn on press and hold casting in the options, which does not work on pad, by the way, just letting you know. This functionality also doesn't work super well on some specs, such as Dev Evoker, but for BM Hunter, we should be fine. Then I'll do one hitting my rotation manually. Okay, ready? Here we go. Let's compare our two parses directly, which is a thing that you can and should do. In fact, you can compare your own parse with a top player who had a roughly similar fight than you did against whatever you're parsing against. Again, we're not striving for perfection here, at least not right away, but doing that may reveal some glaring mistake in your rotation. Back to our own parses though, you'll see that my sweaty tryhard parse is only 5% better than pure one button. But more importantly, they're both purple parses. Purple. They're purple parses. That means I'm throwing up numbers than roughly 80% of players that logged for this encounter. There is some important context I want to add here. As you sim against harder fights, your parse will normalize at least to some extent. Like if you had a similar fight to, oh, say, I don't know, Mythic Rotmire, this would likely land somewhere in the high 40s. In that instance, we're simming against much better players where, again, the skill floor is substantially higher. But back on topic. All that work for marginal improvement over single button. Is this ultimately worth it in the grand scheme? Yes. Yes, it totally is what I would say to you if we were routinely bumping up against an encounters in Rage Timer, but we are just not there yet. So with all that said, if you're planning to join us in raid, or maybe you got benched during a raid, no hard feelings, or you're just doing okay and you want to try a different approach, head over to Dvalin Gaming and take a look at the guides he has there. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this. You're a better, more respectful player for having done so. And I just want to say, the worst thing you can be at anything, outside of even World of Warcraft, at anything, is inconsistent. When you're inconsistent, it's hard to pin down exactly what to try to improve. And if you're consistently bad, at least somebody can step in and go, ooh, you should do this to fix it. But when you're all over the board, sometimes you post really well, sometimes you post really poorly, and there's no method to your madness, it can be really hard to pin down one thing to coach on trying to improve you on. And that's something that I cannot emphasize enough is what one button works to alleviate. If you're doing one button consistently and you're consistently still underperforming, at least we can step in and try to figure out why that's happening. There's something that we can work with there. So in any event, I really recommend that you give it a try. And again, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you doing that, and I will see you in Raid.